To open up our afternoon session, we have Randy Thornhill, who's emeritus professor from the University of New Mexico in the Department of Biology. Randy.
Infectious diseases are the grimmest reaper, the cause of the greatest morbidity and mortality in human ancestral populations, as well as in most of the world today. As such, infectious diseases are the main source of evolutionary selection acting on people. People have psychological and associated behavioral adaptations for avoiding and managing infectious disease. When infectious diseases eat people, they often cause some pretty grim phenotypic effects, as with chronic yaws, a bacterial infection that's infecting the guy at the top. He's alive. You can imagine the misery. And you don't have to go to exotic places, tropical places, and so forth, third world places, in order to find exotic tropical parasites. A study done in one Alabama county last year showed that 1/3 of the people sampled in this county in Alabama had hookworm, which is a very pathogenic parasite that has, including mental retardation. So parasites, infectious diseases, are the grimmest reaper, and thus the strongest force of evolutionary selection acting on people. There are various bodies of evidence that support that claim I just made. One is that immunity genes are evolutionary hotspots within the human genome, showing much more allelic variation across human populations than other genes that are known to affect human fitness. As Fumagalli and his colleagues put it in their recent review, parasites are the main selection pressure in human evolution. Other evidence that infectious diseases are the grimmest reaper. In indigenous societies and ancient populations, infectious diseases cause by far the most juvenile mortality, according to the recent review by Volk and Atkinson. And other evidence that infectious diseases are the grimmest reaper, both child mortality and reduced adult lifespan across countries of the world and across states of the United States are strongly related to infectious disease severity. More infectious disease, greater child mortality, and reduced adult longevity, according to research we have conducted. More evidence that infectious diseases are the grimmest reaper. Parasites and their hosts co-evolve continually and antagonistically without any permanent adaptive solution on either side of the evolutionary arms race. So we never get away from our infectious diseases. They evolve back at us. The existence of evolved human adaptations that function to defend against parasites documents that selection in the deep time past favored individuals with defenses against infectious diseases. These adaptations that humans have for dealing with infectious diseases are diverse and numerous and of two general categories. Said differently, we have two types of immune systems. The behavioral immune system, like the classical immune system, functions to defend against infectious disease. The classical immune system, as we call it, is that immune system that biologists first discovered and has received the greatest amount of research attention. However, the behavioral immune system is now receiving a great deal of research attention as well as a result of findings and ideas like I'm presenting to you today. The behavioral immune system is comprised of feelings, for example, disgust, cognitions, for example, worry about infectious disease, and human core values and the associated behaviors of these core values that function in avoidance and management of infectious diseases. With colleagues, I've developed the parasite stress theory of values. We also call it the parasite stress theory of social behavior because it's a general theory of social behavior. And accordingly, parasite-host coevolutionary races are highly localized on the geographic landscape. So the parasite-host coevolutionary race going on over here on the landscape is typically different than the one going on over here, and these regions can be adjacent and involve different species of parasites or different genotypes of the same species of parasites. Because of this geographic localization of host parasite coevolutionary races, that means that immunity is localized geographically, which means that in-group people have local immunity and are relatively safe to interact with socially. But out-group people are not safe because they harbor novel parasites to which the in-group is not immune. According to the parasite stress theory of values, high parasite stress experienced during an individual's upbringing, during an individual's development, evokes the behavioral immunity values of xenophobia, neophobia, and ethnocentrism. And these are the core values of what cross-cultural psychologists call collectivism and what political scientists call conservatism. So xenophobia, of course, is avoidance, fear, dislike of outgroups, all the way to hating outgroups and you want to kill them and wipe them off the face of the earth and so forth. And it functions to reduce contact with the novel parasites present in outgroups. Neophobia is closely related to xenophobia, or a type of it. It's fear and dislike of new ideas and ways, closed-mindedness to new ways and ideas, valuing conformity and traditional thinking and ways of the in-group. It functions like xenophobia, to avoid outgroup, to avoid foreign, and thus to avoid novel parasites. Ethnocentrism, also a value of behavioral immunity, is in-group social preference and embeddedness. It creates a dutiful and enduring local social network that manages infectious disease when infectious disease hits the in-group. The embedded local in-group is comprised of close and distant kin, extended family, and other people with local in-group values and hence with local immunity. So care by in-group members was paramount for surviving infections throughout human evolution, of course. So in sum, parasite stress theory says that xenophobia, neophobia, and ethnocentrism function as behavioral immunity. In contrast, low parasite stress experienced during an individual's development causes the values of xenophilia. Xenophilia is the opposite of xenophobia. Xenophilia is liking foreigners, liking people different from you, and willing to interact with them socially and so forth. That's xenophilia. That is evoked by an ontogeny, a development of low infectious disease encounters. Neophilia is the opposite of neophobia. Neophilia is liking new ideas, new ways of doing things, progress, innovation, that kind of thing. Reduced extended family nepotism and focus instead on the nuclear family as characteristic of people who grow up under low infectious disease. And interaction and affiliation with outgroup people, even those with different values, behaviors, colors, and so forth, are just fine for social interaction. That is, low parasite stress experienced during an individual's development evokes the core values of what cross-cultural psychologists call individualism and what political scientists call liberalism. So liberal values have the benefit of creating open-mindedness, neophilia, you're open to new ideas and ways of doing things, progress and so forth, and creating a diverse mate pool and a diverse social network in general for reciprocal altruism. So liberal values have great benefits, but the cost is that you can encounter infectious diseases that are present in all these diverse people you're interacting with, the outgroup people. Hence, liberalism is adaptive when infectious disease adversity is low. The theory proposes psychological adaptation. We call it the values adopter psychological adaptation that conditionally adopts the values that are suitable for the local level of infectious disease. Humans have, of course, a suite of psychological adaptations that function in acquiring culture. Acquiring those cultural items, put those cultural items in your cultural repertoire that work to deal with local adversity. More technically, adversity pertaining to fitness reduction in human evolutionary history and ancestral settings. So this values adopter psychological adaptation is just a component of our design for acquiring adaptive culture, specifically acquiring those values that will work in relation to the local level of infectious disease. More on the values adopter psychological adaptation. Values are adopted during one's development to yield a set that is optimal for the local infectious disease level. So conservative values are adopted optimally under high parasite levels, and liberal values are adopted under low parasite adversity. Developmental cues that we've talked about that are important in guiding the optimal choice of values as an individual is developing to deal with the local level of infectious disease are such things as activation of one's classical immune system. So if your classical immune system is activated a lot as you're going through time, you indeed are living in an ecological setting of high infectious disease. It is optimal then to adopt conservative values. If, on the other hand, your classical immune system is not activated a lot, then it's optimal to adopt liberal values, because that's the kind of culture you're going to be operating in. Another cue we think is an ancestral cue. Observe mortality and illness of the people around you. What shape are the people in around you? Are there a lot of is there a lot of scarring, asymmetries, deformities, those kinds of things that ancestrally were reliable indicators of high infectious disease? If so, go conservative with your values. If not, go liberal. So the parasite stress theory of values has been tested in many ways since we first published it in the year 2008. And one body of evidence is that, as predicted by the theory, parasite stress correlates positively with conservatism, negatively with liberalism, across countries of the world, across states of the U.S., and across indigenous societies from the ethnographic record. Lots of research has documented those patterns. So as infectious disease increase across regions, people indeed become more conservative, whether you're measuring across countries, across states, or across indigenous societies. As infectious diseases reduce across regions, people become more liberal. Also, as predicted by the theory, infectious diseases transmitted human to human are primarily important in predicting regional variation in conservatism and liberalism across countries, across states, we have shown. So human infectious diseases come in two categories: those we get from other people and those we get from non-human animals. Non-human animals are pets and livestock, and a bunch of those that we get from these non-human animals, and a bunch we get from humans. And it is those specifically that we get from humans that predicts variation in values across countries of the world and across states of the United States. We've shown in our research. And this kind of analysis controls for lots of different confounds when you think about it. So it's not just simply that as diseases increase across countries, across regions, across indigenous societies, people get more conservative. That's true. And as the diseases are reduced across those domains, people get more liberal. That's true too. But it's specifically those diseases transmitted human to human that account for variation in values across the world and across states. Also, as predicted by the theory, parasite stress theory, individuals immediately become more conservative when contagion risk is increased experimentally. So this prediction of the theory has received quite a lot of research attention recently. And it works like this. When people perceive immediate parasite danger, so you show them cues of immediate parasite danger. So image of a person with skin pox, facial disfigurement, dirty toilet, person sneezing, those kinds of cues, the people who see these cues immediately show increased conservatism. They become more disgust sensitive, they become more ethnocentric, they become more xenophobic, they become more closed-minded and value conformity more. Just seeing a slideshow of infectious disease cues. And much of this research I'm referring to here has shown that the immediate shifts to increased conservatism upon seeing these cues of parasite threat are specific to parasite threat. Other kinds of threats to person don't bring about increased conservatism. So the psychological design is for responding in a more conservative fashion in terms of your values to parasite threats specifically. So I've discussed evidence documenting that infectious disease is the most important agent of selection on humans, that is the Grimmest Reaper. This is infectious disease's direct action as Grim Reaper. However, parasites as killers of people are even grimmer than their direct effect on human death. Parasites are killers indirectly too. So to explain the indirect effect of parasites in killing people, I needed to tell you about the parasite stress theory of values, as I did. Infectious disease causes conservative values, which, when extreme, can kill on a broad scale, as in outgroup xenophobia, hate, dehumanization, that causes genocide and civil and ethnic wars and terrorism. So take, for example, the American Holocaust, as it's called by historians. That was the decimation of estimated 100 million indigenous people, North America, South America, Central America, by European folks who came in and invaded. This is by far the most massive genocide in the history of the world. It's caused by the direct action of parasites in part. So, of course, these folks, indigenous folks, lacked immunity to all these novel European diseases that were being brought in, and that killed a lot of them, maybe half of them. But the other half was killed simply by xenophobic hate, dehumanization. So as Theodore Roosevelt felt, and lots of other, Andrew Jackson, and some of the anchors of of North American, of U.S. history, the only good Indians are dead Indians, ideology of the U.S. government's efforts to exterminate the original human occupants of the U.S. So this xenophobia, dehumanization of people that goes along with extreme conservatism killed a lot of Native Americans. Other mass xenophobic atrocities go here too. So the Nazis' final solution, and their solution was about worrying about infectious disease, historians tell us. But that was fundamentally what was on the mind of Nazis, getting rid of infectious disease. And they wanted a final solution to that. Well, kill all the outgroup folks was their way to that solution. The number historians count is 15 million that they killed in the context of trying to get rid of outgroup parasites. These were Jews, gypsies, and other outgroups. All called the genocides of indigenous people in Africa, Asia, Australia, Europe, and New Zealand are well documented. Colleagues and I have studied the occurrences of within-country wars, as war scholars call these things. Here you got within-country wars and between-country wars. And within-country wars come in various categories: civil wars, ethnic wars, tribal wars, clan wars, different kinds of within-country wars. And war scholars have keep up with the frequencies of these types of wars across countries of the world. We took their data and looked at it in relation to the parasite stress theory of values. And robust predictors of these wars across the world are parasite adversity and conservatism. So as parasites increase across the world, you get more of each of these types of within-country wars. And as conservatism increases across the world, you get more of each of these types of wars we have shown in our research. So within-country wars are very, very grim reapers, of course. Take just, for example, the current civil wars and associated genocides. In South Sudan, 300 million dead and counting. In Syria, 500,000 dead and counting. Syria, much in the news recently with some of their lunacy there. Parasites and the conservative values they cause are killers in mass atrocities of wars, genocides, and holocausts. Parasites and the conservative values they cause are killers too in other contexts. Parasites and conservatism are strong predictors of violence by whites on blacks in U.S. history. Historians have known for a long time that the lynching of blacks by whites in the United States was concentrated in the most conservative states, the southeastern United States. They've known that a long time, but we took their data, the data on lynching from the Tuskegee data, validated data on lynching by states, frequency of lynching by states, and looked at it in relation to the parasite stress theory. And the parasite stress theory predicts parasite stress will be a good significant predictor of these lynchings, and it is at a correlation, a zero-order correlation of 0.7, and that conservatism will also predict the frequency of these lynchings, and indeed it does, again at a strong correlation of 0.5 across states. Male-male homicide. This is another context in which parasite stress and conservatism and the conservatism it causes plays a role in the frequency of killing, indirect role through the effect on values, conservatism. So we've studied male-male homicide frequency across countries and across states of the U.S. in relation to the parasite stress theory. I'll just give you some data here on across U.S. states. So we found, we tested and strongly supported the hypothesis that male-male homicide, which is the typical homicide, is caused by collectivist values and associated high parasite stress. What I mean by homicide, what the natives mean when they say homicide, is a human kills another human outside the context of war, genocide, and Holocaust. So that's what I mean by homicide. So we tested and strongly supported the hypothesis that male-male homicide, which is the typical homicide, one male kills another male, is caused by collectivist values and associated high parasite stress. The context of these slangs is that a man's status, reputation, or exclusive sexual ownership of his woman is challenged by another man, and resulting in escalated antagonism, violence that can become lethal between the men. A range of studies document that conservative values place a premium on reputation and honor of extended family and other in-group members, and that conservatives are embedded in their in-group and don't understand self as separate from in-group well-being, reputation, and honor. Hence, when a conservative man is dissed, when he's dishonored, disrespected, simultaneously and necessarily, you disrespect his whole in-group. His grandma, his granddad, great-granddad, and brothers, and all of his friends in his in-group. That's what you do when you disrespect a highly conservative man. And so that's why conservatism is related to male-male homicide rate. And all hell may break loose with that, including lethal violence. There's a strong positive relationship between rate of male-male homicide and parasite stress, a relationship of 0.7 across U.S. states we showed in our research. And this relationship remains when Gini, which is wealth disparity among individuals in a region. It's an important variable in economics, of course. They measure it all the time, Gini coefficient, and it's very predictive of homicide because as Gini increases, you get more and more men who are socially disenfranchised. Those men engage in more risk-taking, more violence, and they kill each other more under high Gini. That's true. It is a cause, but it's pale. It's a small cause, actually, relative to infectious disease, we show. So we control Gini, the effect of Gini on homicide rate. Actually, we take all the presumed causes that the homicide researchers claim are causal and remove them, and we still get a very robust relationship between parasite stress and male-male homicide. So with regard to Gini, the parasite stress explains much of the variance in this homicide independent of Gini. Also, there's a strong positive correlation between male-male homicide and conservatism, correlation of 0.6 across the states. And this relationship remains quite robust when Gini is removed as well. Thus, conservatism explains much of the variation in this homicide independent of Gini. Parasite stress is by far the strongest predictor of homicide. This homicide, we're talking male-male homicide. We also looked at other kinds of homicide. So men killing their romantic partners, women and romantic partners, girlfriends and wives, girlfriends and wives killing men. Those kinds of homicides too, less frequent than the male-male homicide, but they're predicted too, very, very strongly by parasite stress and conservatism. So parasite stress by far the strongest predictor of homicide known, and collectivism is a robust predictor of homicide as well. And that's all I've got time for basically, and I'll do some summarizing of things tonight in the 5-minute sessions. Thank you very much for your interest.
It's a very persuasive and obviously very important thesis, really. Why do you say that it's the detection of the parasite load in childhood which matters? And what evidence have you got for that? Is there any evidence of people, for example, being adopted out of their parasite high environment?
If you look at when kids develop their core ideology, there's a lot of research on that after World War II. Looking at, at what age do these real conservative people begin to emerge in life history? And it's 5, 6, 8 years
But they're living in a conservative family, presumably.
Yeah.
So, I mean, don't see how you see that that's a reaction to the detection of parasite threat, rather than them just taking on the values of their community. I mean, I'm not disputing the general correlation, but I was wondering why you put so much emphasis on this being something which you establish your patterns and your values as a child because of the reaction to stress.
Other kind of cultural acquisition, like language. So language has got its form of acquisition, specialized adaptations to acquire language. Other aspects of social life, are acquired the same way.
But I thought you were saying that the child herself picks up from the environment the actual presence of parasites and
reads cues of the level
yes, right,
of
okay.
parasites and then adopts cultural items appropriately for the level of parasites assessed. That's what the argument is.
yeah, it's obviously a very interesting idea, but I wondered whether really there's any evidence that that's how it works.
Well, you take these people in this room and show them the edge over here, show them the parasite slides, and you be sporting Donald Trump next week.
No, but Randy, I'm interested in this question of specifically locating it, almost as during a sensitive period in childhood, when if you're exposed to high parasite load or signs of it, that you'll take on conservative values, because it's obviously very important in terms of shifting values if you want to.
So if you take, there's another component of conservatism I didn't discuss. That is the research shows is very, very closer to your concern here. So it is the importance people place on physical attractiveness. That's very highly correlated with the degree of conservatism. And basically the idea is pretty straightforward now in retrospect, once all the evidence is in. But if you live in an area of high infectious disease, you better pay attention to physical attractiveness. Physical attractiveness is a health certification. And indeed people do. There's lots of that across countries, across states. You can show people the slides and then place more influence on the view. There's a nice study done in Bangladesh looking at childhood histories of disease, from clinics, rural clinics. So they had data on lots and thousands of kids and the disease histories in these rural villages. And that predicted, they didn't measure conservatism per se, unfortunately. All they measured was the importance of treatment to physical attractiveness and social pattern. So that kind of thing. So that could be done, and would be. I mean, how else would you get the robust correlations between parasite adversity, infectious disease adversity in states and countries, and conservatism without that kind of mechanism going on?
Well, as a mechanism, but I'm just asking about the time at which it operates. You mean adults could be responding to this, their values could be dependent on what environment they're experiencing then, rather than it being a memory of childhood exposure to parasites. I mean, what's really needed, of course, is a kind of adoption studies, but those can't be done.
I'm thinking part of your answer. Where are the most critical windows of learning the information about the local level of infectious disease? At what ages? I mean, that's still open.
Okay.
But it's ongoing. I mean, again, you take these people, take a bunch of people, and show them slides, and they become more concerned. And the slides are specific to, we show them threats of, dying, car wrecks, all that stuff. They don't shift conservatism, but those kind of threats are specific to parasites. So that you expect from elements associated with these mechanisms to continue learning about the local level of infectious disease. Because if the local level of infectious disease goes way down, then you can be liberal and have all the benefits associated with liberalism, right? Big make pool, pool for the reciprocity, openness to new ideas. So you expect this thing to be designed to have an openness that will remain, not to shut out, but there still can be critical windows, sensitive windows in the design of that psychology.
No, so maybe time for one more question, Tom?
Sure. I was wondering about differentiating between the impact of parasites and impact of the awareness of fragility of life and death that parasite presence produces. And you talked about the studies linking, showing a stronger link between parasites passed human to human, and that's pretty compelling. I wondered about there's these other literatures pretty.
Compelling than even that, because if you look at how the data came out, the zoonotic and the pure sense diseases, the only part from non-human had no predictive power whatsoever.
That's really interesting. And on the other hand, there are these other literatures showing very similar effects from just thinking about death or being reminded of death or standing in front of a funeral home, which kind of, that's the work I've been involved in, which, we've always thought of that as a consequence of awareness of the problem of death. And then there's another line of research that challenges our work, terror management theory, sometimes, not always, but sometimes showing very parallel effects on conservatism and hostility towards people who are different, produced by threats like uncertainty, social rejection. So there's a host of other effects that produce very parallel effects. And how do you think they're related?
Yeah, we have not claimed that infectious disease variation is the only cause of the values dimension.
Yeah.
We have not claimed that. We show that infectious disease is important in understanding values. That's what this theory does. We don't eliminate other possibilities. But I think a lot of those older possibilities were just really hand-waving without any real empirical evidence. And we need to reconsider some of those in light of when you stand in front of a funeral home, death, parasites kill people. So
Right.
people over here, I bet, you take a person to a funeral home, and I bet they measure their conservatism before and after.
Sure. But that's one example. But like in another experiment, we could subliminally present the word dead on the slide to half of us, and we would get a parallel effect. So what I'm especially lately been really interested in is the interplay between evolved mechanisms of the sort that you're talking about and other psychological mechanisms that are the consequences of awareness of death. And in a way, our position, so there are these other theorists who say it's not death, it's uncertainty, it's a lack of control. And sometimes they get parallel effects as death, sometimes they don't, we don't. But I guess I'm really interested in the interplay that might occur between this mechanism. So for example, I guess, has anyone ever, I guess this would be unethical to randomly put people in a parasite, randomly assign people to parasite exposure, you know, or parasite exposure without any awareness of it, of its consequences. Has that ever been looked at? Because, you know, presumably in these regions that are parasite rich, there's more, you know, more death, there's more sickness, there's more deformity, which produce consciousness of it. So I guess the question I'm kind of getting at is that the parasites that the behavioral immune system is responding to, or the awareness of their consequences being death.
I don't think there's generally the awareness of, you know, so awareness of things in the environment that ancestrally reliably correlated with actual parasite growth.
Because, well, that's very, very similar to terror management theory. But what I understand the parasite theory suggesting is that it's the parasites themselves, independent of awareness.
Independent what?
Independent of awareness of them. So for example, if somebody had a horribly infectious disease here and they didn't know it and we didn't know it, we should start liking Trump more. You know, and just for what it's worth, just, you know, to a largely liberal audience, we found a number of times that just asking people a couple questions about death increases the support for Trump, and frighteningly, it does that for liberals too, you know?
Yeah, there's a recent analysis done, we didn't do it, done by economics magazine, showing that the best predictor of support for Trump on a county basis of 3,500, you know, big sample, 3,500 counties in the U.S. The best predictor at county level of votes for Trump was the health predictor.
Interesting. I've heard pickup truck prevalence also is a big one, which I was reminded of driving by the big pickup truck parking lot outside here. But so you would expect parasite prevalence independent of awareness to have a big effect. Is that the, in other words, yeah, if there were.
People aren't aware. So if you go into, I mean, you know, people are very prejudiced, say, against homosexuals.
Right.
You know, people are prejudiced against people that are overweight. People are prejudiced against people that are underweight. You ask those people, why are you prejudiced? Women like that, folks, or gay folks, or people that don't do sex the way I do, and that kind of stuff. And they have no idea that really what they're looking, what those prejudices arise from, is work about infectious disease.
Mm-hmm.
There are some people have high concern about infectious disease. That's measured
Right.
objective, validated scale. And the way the infectious disease worry works is you exaggerate, you overgeneralize, adaptively so, because if that person who's typically actually has an infectious disease and you don't avoid him or her, then the consequences of that error
Yeah.
can be great, literally.
Yeah.
In fact, the error diminishes the error.
So, but I just want.
This is probably a super interesting question.
No, just one more quick clarification, because I want to just make sure I understand, because is it the worry that parasites produce, or is there a direct mechanism between the body picking up parasites and...
I would think both. But
Both, okay.
Yeah, I would think.
Okay, because then, then those two theories have a lot in common, but the unique prediction would be independent of awareness or worry. Whatever detects parasites that sets off the physical immune system ought to do it as well.
If you're responding to an activation in the classical immune system, then that's an awareness at some level we call latent effect. The immune system is activated, and people come on the surface, and the immune system is activated. And so that's the awareness of parasites. But that same person would be prejudiced against people that are overweight, and that would be an awareness of infectious disease.
Right.
So both.
Thank you, Randy Thornhill. Thank you.